The Long Night, by John Cronshaw, a Ravenglass Legends prequel. This pitiable charade is ostensibly a hunt designed to separate the boys who are fit to be warriors from those who are not. Armed with rudimentary spears and adorned in the most uncivilized attire, these youths venture into the dark woods, guided only by torchlight and the cacophony of their own braying. The sorry game aims to find them worthy of something they can never truly be. A civilized man. Ulrich von Borgen, a chronicle of the lesser civilizations. Chapter 1. The training yard lay in the shadow of Miran Castle, its stone walls stark against the wintry sky. Icy winds howled in from the Brawn Sea, cutting through cloaks and resolve alike. Ragnar's grip tightened on his short sword and dagger, the twin blades dulled for sparring. Getting slow, Kest. His breath misted the air, his blades a blur as they clashed with Kest's longsword. Kest parried with a growl, his blade humming as it met Ragnar's. You call this slow? You're the one relying on tricks. Tricks that work. Ragnar twirled his sword to distract, while the dagger drove for Kest's ribs. With a deft motion, Kest blocked the incoming blade. Not today. Boys. Ragnar's uncle Olaf, a seasoned warrior and trainer, stood clad in wolf pelts, his braided beard frosted by the wind. That's enough prancing around. Back in line. The two friends joined the row of young warriors, their eyes bright, their chests heaving. All had seen 14 summers, some perhaps 15, but none had yet earned the right to call themselves men. All right, you lot, Olaf strode up and down the line. Today we focus on formation and shield work. In the battles to come, you're as good as dead if you can't protect your brothers in the shield wall. Great, Ragnar sighed. More drills. Kest leaned in. Would you prefer another lecture from Ulfred on the historical importance of beard care? Ragnar snorted. Those lectures are the stuff of nightmares. Ragnar grabbed a battered shield and a blunted sword, stepping into one of the lines that had formed across the training ground. His gaze met Kest's, who was on the opposite side, gripping his own shield and sword. Hold the line, hold the line. Olaf paced between them. I've seen newborn goats with better stances. He raised his arm. Engage. The two lines advanced. With a deafening crash, the shield walls met. The impact rattled through Ragnar's bones, sending jolts up his arms. He gritted his teeth and pushed back, feet digging into the cold earth. You call this a shield wall? Olaf's voice roared above the clash of metal and wood. Kest surged forward, his shield banging against Ragnar's with such force that it rocked him on his heels. For a moment, Kest pushed him back, Ragnar's stance slipping. He caught himself just in time, dug his heels into the hard earth and shoved forward, regaining lost ground. Good, Ragnar. Olaf's voice cut through the clamour. Use your legs, boy. A shield wall is only as strong as its weakest link. Swords clashed next, a riot of sparks flying in the air. Kest's blade aimed high while Ragnar's went low. Metal scraped against metal, each trying to find an opening, a vulnerability in the other's defence. Finally, Olaf clapped. Break! Ragnar stepped back, lowering his shield. Both lines disengaged, warriors panting and sweating despite the winter chill. Olaf looked between the boys and nodded. Not bad today, but remember, a real battle has no breaks, and enemies don't come at you one at a time. He turned to Ragnar and Kest. You are almost at your long night. Do you think you're ready? Ragnar thumped his chest. Yes, sir. We'll see, eh? Olaf waved a hand. Dismissed. As the boys began to disperse, Kest joined Ragnar's side. Can't believe we're finally doing the long night. Think we'll bag an elk, or will you settle for a rabbit? Ragnar dropped his shield with the others. Oh, I'll get that elk. Just you wait. He shrugged a shoulder. Maybe a couple of elks. A boar. Kest laughed as they walked away from the training ground, the icy winds making their cloaks flap like banners. A couple of elks and a boar? Planning to single-handedly feed the village through winter, are you? Ragnar grinned, slinging his arm around Kest's shoulder. If it gets us out of training with the boys, and into the rank of young men, I'll haul back a wyvern if I have to. But I've heard they're terribly difficult to cook. You'd know, would you? Already planning the feast? Kest sniffed. Well, someone has to think of the finer details. It's not all blood and glory, you know. Yeah, there's also the mead. Oh, the mead, how could I forget? Kest slapped his forehead. See, this is why we make a good team. I bring the finesse. You bring the, let's call it raw enthusiasm. Raw enthusiasm? That's one way to put it. Ragnar chuckled. But in all seriousness, Kest, the long night is a big deal. We've hunted before, but this is different. This is our rite of passage. Kest's expression sobered for a moment. I know. And that's why we'll give it everything we've got. Ragnar nodded, feeling the weight of the impending ritual settle over him. This is our chance to prove ourselves, to earn our place among the warriors. I don't intend to waste it. Neither do I, just wish they did it in the summer. Wouldn't be a long night if they did it in the summer. We could make it the long day, be warmer than whatever this is. He gestured vaguely towards the sea. And who knows, maybe one day we'll be the ones yelling at the recruits about their wobbly shield walls. One day maybe, but first, let's get through the long night. May your blade stay sharp, Rag. Kest clapped him on the back. And yours. Chapter 2. Later that day, Ragnar and Kest strode back into the training yard, their footsteps resounding with purpose against the hard-packed earth. The towering walls of Mere and Castle cast long shadows as the sun began its descent. Crisp wind from the Brawn Sea whispered through the banners and pennants decorating the yard. Ragnar unwrapped the cloth from around his sword and dagger. You sure you can handle those? Kest said. Or would you rather use the wooden ones? Ragnar smirked as he unsheathed the blades, holding them up to catch the dying light. If you're scared, you know you can back out. Kest chuckled and unsheathed his own longsword. Well, if you're going to tire yourself out before the long night, who am I to stop you? Ragnar squared off against his friend, twirling his short sword and dagger with practiced ease. Tire myself out? This extra training is what's going to make us, or at least me, stand out. Kest adopted his fighting stance, his eyes narrowing as he focused on Ragnar's blades. You think we're not prepared enough? We've been training for this for years. Yes, but we've never faced the long night. Ragnar initiated the first move with a feint to the left. The extra training could be the difference between us, passing or failing. Kest deflected the feint and launched a counterattack. Or the difference between going into it fresh or exhausted. Ragnar sidestepped, narrowly avoiding Kest's blade. Well, when we bring back that elk, or wyvern, you'll be thanking me for these extra sessions. Kest grinned as their blades met in a loud clang. If we bring back a wyvern, I'll name it after you. Ragnar laughed as he disengaged and circled Kest. A wyvern named Ragnar. Now that's a legacy. They lunged at each other once more, their blades singing through the air. You're holding back. Ragnar shot forward with his short sword. His dagger followed in a fluid motion, both blades aimed at Kest's defences. Am I? Kest twisted and parried. Or are you just slow today? Slow. You wish. Ragnar's blades became a flurry of steel as he redoubled his efforts, each strike seeking to find a chink in Kest's defence. Kest blocked and parried, his own blade meeting Ragnar's in a series of quick exchanges. I thought you were going to bring down a wyvern. Can't even get past a simple longsword. But wyverns don't have longswords, do they? Ragnar grinned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted an opening. Kest returned the grin with one of his own. Fair point. Just then Olaf wandered back into the training yard. His gaze fell upon Ragnar and Kest as he leaned on a wooden post at the edge of the training area. You two should be resting. There's a reason it's called the long night, you know? Ragnar and Kest paused, lowering their weapons and turning to Olaf. We've got to be ready, sir. Ragnar panted, catching his breath. Ready is what I like to hear. Olaf strode over. But remember, your quarry won't tire out as quickly as you lads. Kest wiped the sweat from his brow. So, what you're saying is, we need to work on our stamina. Among other things, the long night won't wait and neither will your enemies. Just as Ragnar was about to reply, a commotion erupted near the entrance of the training yard. Voices rose in a mix of excitement and curiosity as the thud of heavy boots reverberated through the ground. Both Ragnar and Kest turned their heads towards the noise, their attention diverted from Olaf's counsel. A crowd had gathered around a young man dragging an elk behind him on a cart. The large animal's antlers jutted out like a crown. Its lifeless eyes stared at nothing. "What's going on over there?" Ragnar squinted, trying to make out the face of the young man in the middle of the crowd. Kest shielded his eyes from the setting sun and peered in the same direction. "That's Sven, isn't it?" Ragnar frowned. "Sven? What would he be doing back here?" Kest shrugged, sheathing his sword. "No idea. I thought old Ravennose was exiled for cowardice." "Yeah, he was," Ragnar sneered. "Makes no sense for him to be back, especially not with a prize elk." Sven, the outcast, the disgrace to the Wolfsbane clan, stood before the gathering crowd, his eyes meeting Ragnar the elders. Ragnar's father stepped forward. "You dare return here?" "With an offering, chieftain." Sven gestured to the elk beside him. "For the good of Mirand and the Wolfsbane clan." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ragnar felt a surge of indignation, his grip tightening on the hilts of his sheathed blades as his father patted Sven's shoulder. Kest leaned close to Ragnar. "Your father's not really considering it, is he?" Ragnar's eyes remained locked on the unfolding scene. "He might. We need all the help we can get with the stores so low. And an elk that size?" Ragnar shook his head. His father finally spoke. "Your offering is accepted, Sven. May this mark the beginning of your redemption." The crowd gasped, then erupted in a mix of cheers and mutterings. Sven bowed, a broad smile peeling back his lips as he locked eyes with Ragnar. "Come on." Ragnar scowled as he turned to Kest. "We've got work to do," Kest nodded. "Yeah, but first I want to know what that raven-nosed prick's really up to." "So do I, Kest. So do I." Chapter 3. Men and women filled the mead hall's long tables, their eyes darting to the head of the room where Ragnar the Elder sat. His raven-glass warhammer stood mounted on the wall behind him, its dark presence reflecting the mood of the hall. Seated along one of the tables, Ragnar and Kest exchanged uneasy glances, flanked by the other boys in training. Mugs of ale sat untouched. "Look at him." Kest nudged Ragnar. "Can't believe your father's let him in here." Sven sat at the top table with Ragnar the Elder, a serene smile set on his face. "He's enjoying this, isn't he?" Ragnar's eyes narrowed. "As a cat with a mouse." Kest took a sip of his ale. "And we're the bloody mouse." Ragnar the Elder rose from his seat, and the hall fell into silence. He cast his gaze across the room, the hammer of Wolfsbane framing his features in an uncanny black halo. "Tonight we find ourselves at a crossroads. The long night approaches. It is a time when we must gather what we can to sustain us through the season's chill. However, before we face the wilderness, we must confront the division within our own walls." His eyes locked onto Sven, who met his gaze without flinching. "Sven left a coward, but has returned to us bearing an offering that serves the village. I have accepted his gift and, by extension, his presence among us." Ragnar clenched his fists under the table, his fingernails digging into his palms. Kest leaned close. "I think the old man's completely lost it. Maybe Sven's changed." Kest snorted, earning glares from a few of the older boys. Ragnar the Elder ran a hand down his beard. "Offerings alone do not erase past deeds, nor do they promise future loyalty. With this in mind, Sven will join the other boys during the long night. If he can prove his worth, then he is worthy." Hushed whispers spread through the hall. Kest shook his head. "Sorry to say it, Rag, but your father's truly lost it." Ragnar's jaw tightened. "This is a test. For Sven, for us, for everyone." His father raised a hand, silencing the hall once more. "The long night will not only serve as a reckoning for Sven, but also as a proving ground for our young warriors. To all boys in training, you must prove your mettle, your unity as a clan. Show us that Mirand's future is secure in your hands." Ragnar met his father's gaze, seeing the unspoken challenge that lay there, the challenge of leadership, of worth, and perhaps of redemption. For all of them. As his father took his seat, the room erupted in animated chatter, the tension breaking into conversation and debate. Kest turned to Ragnar. "Looks like we've got a hunt to prepare for," Ragnar nodded. "And prepare we shall, for the hunt, for the winter, for whatever Sven's plotting. We'll be ready." Kest raised his mug. "To being ready, then." Ragnar clinked his mug against Kest's. 2 being ready. Chapter 4. Ragnar, Kest and Sven found themselves grouped together in the training yard, sharpening their weapons and checking their gear. So, Sven, you've got a new bow there, huh? Kest tried to break the tension, nodding towards the finely crafted longbow by Sven's side. Sven glanced down at the weapon. Aye, it's from the southern tribes. Figured it was a worthy addition for the hunt. Southern tribes? What did you trade for it? A bag of tricks? Kest chuckled, looking at Ragnar for a shared laugh. But Ragnar kept his expression blank. Tricks won't help us on the hunt. Sven sighed. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me, Ragnar. I wronged you, wronged the clan. I'm not expecting open arms. But what can I say? When the Reach men came, I was scared. And yet you're here, armed and ready to join our hunt. Kest stepped between them. All right. Let's not spill blood before we even see a boar, eh? He paused, eyeing them both. We've got an important task ahead. Let's focus on that. Ragnar looked at Kest, his jaw tightening. All right, let's focus then. Sven, can you actually shoot with that thing, or is it just for show? Sven picked up the longbow, knocking an arrow with practiced ease. He aimed at a distant target and released. The arrow whistled through the air, hitting the target dead center. He turned to Ragnar and set his bow down. It's not for show. Seems like you've picked up some skills on your little exile, Kest said. Now what else are you packing? Sven opened his sack to reveal an assortment of blades, rope, and other hunting gear. Enough to get by? Rope? Kest grinned. Planning on catching an elk or hanging yourself? I thought about the latter a few times, Sven said, but I figured I owe the clan more than that. Ragnar looked up, meeting Sven's gaze. So you say, but saying and doing are different beasts. True. The corners of Sven's mouth twitched, but I intend to prove my words through my actions, on this hunt and beyond. Kest raised an eyebrow. You sound like a saga, Sven, all high and mighty. Just remember we're still the ones who'll have to put up with your snoring in the tent. Sven laughed. Fair enough. Ragnar sheathed his no-sharp blade. We'd better get moving. The sun waits for no one and like us to have a full day in the forest tomorrow. Kest slung his gear over his shoulder. Well, lads, to the long night we go. 3 merry men and a bag full of blades. What could go wrong? Sven picked up his pack, his eyes meeting Ragnar's one more time. Thank you for this chance. I won't squander it. Ragnar nodded but said nothing. Kest cleared his throat. All right. Let's go become legends, shall we? Or, at the very least, let's avoid becoming dinner for a pack of wolves. Chapter 5. Ragnar stood at the edge of the snow-dappled forest, his dual blades sheathed at his sides. To his right, Kest shifted his bow on his shoulder, eyes scanning the pines and firs. To his left, Sven seemed a towering figure, holding a longbow with a quiver of arrows strapped to his back. Right then, Kest said. Who's up for a spot of elk hunting? Last one to bag an elk cooks the meals for the next week. Ragnar managed a wry smile. I'd rather not suffer through another one of your experimental stews, Kest. Oi, last time I'll have you know, that was a culinary masterpiece in the making. Let's focus, Sven said. We're not here for sport. Do you two not take anything seriously? Ragnar locked eyes with Sven. Fine by me, so lead the way, Master Tracker. Sven nodded, taking the first step into the shadowy forest. Keep your eyes peeled. The snow will show tracks, but the falling flakes will cover them quickly. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, Kest sidled up to Ragnar. So if we find bear tracks leading into a cave, do we get extra points for bravery? I'd say so, but only if you go in first. Sven grumbled. No one's going into any bear caves. We're after food, remember? Ragnar nodded, all humour fading as he took in the quiet surroundings, their world now a sea of white and towering evergreens, the distant sounds of forest creatures muffled by the snow. All right, let's move. The sooner we find our quarry, the sooner we can return home. What happens if we catch something good before tomorrow? Kest asked. We keep hunting, Ragnar said, and we add it to the haul. But will it count as part of the long night if it's not actually the long night? Ragnar shrugged. We'll catch so many creatures tomorrow that it won't matter whether we do or we don't. Sven stopped and pointed at a set of tracks half covered by fresh snow. Elk tracks. Fresh. They can't be far. Ragnar squinted at the markings. Could be anything. Even a boar, perhaps. Sven snorted. Well, Kest said, if it's a boar, at least we won't go hungry, eh? They followed the tracks in tense silence until Sven gestured for them to halt. A herd of elk grazed in a clearing up ahead. With bows drawn, Sven and Kest crept closer. A twig snapped under Ragnar's foot. The elk raised their heads and bolted into the forest. Sven shot Ragnar a glare. Well done. Ragnar's face flushed red. You act as if you've never made a mistake. Kest rolled his eyes. You're both stupid if you thought this would be over quickly. It's called the long night for a reason. Ragnar and Sven sighed. Look, if we bagged that elk right away, we'd never get to enjoy this lovely outing. And they do say you learn more from failure than success. Sven turned his glare to Kest. Very well, let's move on, and hope your learning experience hasn't cost us. Ragnar grinned. Trust me, next time we won't fail. As twilight descended, the shadows of the trees elongated. We should make camp, Ragnar said. I concur, Sven said. Unless you want to make friends with wolves. Ragnar led them to a small clearing where the forest floor was relatively flat and began to set up a perimeter as Kest and Sven raised the tent. He collected sturdy branches, setting them in a circle and filling in gaps with smaller twigs and leaves. It wasn't a fortress, but it would give them some warning if any animals decided to investigate. With the camp set up, they gathered around the fire. Kest took out some dried meat from his pack and began to eat. Hardly a feast, but it will do. He offered some to the others. Sven accepted. Better than nothing. He tossed some twigs onto the fire. Remember when we went hunting with Olaf a few summers back? Kest laughed. Was that the one where Ragnar got chased by a boar? That's the one. Ragnar sighed. You know, that thing was nearly 3 times my size. Gets bigger every time you tell it, Kest said, and it had you up a tree for half the hunt before Olaf came and brought it down. Taught me to never underestimate my prey. Kest laughed again. Only you could turn being treed by a boar into a heroic tale. Sven looked into the fire for a moment before speaking. I haven't been the man I should have been. My exile wasn't just about leaving. He turned to Ragnar. I've had time to think, to regret and to hope that perhaps I could find a way to make amends. My offering to your father was the first step. Well, actions speak louder than words, but your words aren't a bad start. Chapter 6. Ragnar awoke first, his legs and back stiff with the cold. He breathed warmth into his hands and nudged Kest with his foot. Kest groaned, sitting up. Morning already? Feels like I just closed my eyes. If you call that horrendous snoring closing your eyes, then yes. Kest grinned. Sven sat up. This is it, the long night. Ragnar nodded. Yup. They ate breakfast, packed their gear and resumed their hunt. Ragnar led the way, his eyes scouring the forest for signs of game, his senses tuned to the subtle noises around him. An hour into their journey, Sven held up a hand. Look, tracks. He pointed at the forest floor, where fresh imprints were visible in the soft snow. Elk. Ragnar gestured to the tracks leading deeper into the woods. Well, what are we waiting for? An invitation? Kest knocked an arrow onto his bow. Ragnar followed the tracks in silence, each step as soft as a whisper, each breath measured. As he pushed through a thicket, he stopped and nodded towards an elk grazing unaware. Kest drew his bow, but Ragnar held out an arm to stop him. No, this one's Sven's. Sven looked at Ragnar, then shrugged. Stepping forward, he raised his longbow, took aim and released. The arrow sailed through the air and struck true, piercing the elk's side. The animal gave a pained cry and stumbled. Kest released an arrow of his own, striking deep into the creature's neck. The elk faltered, its eyes glazing over before it collapsed lifeless. They stood still for a moment, staring at their kill. Good shot. Ragnar locked eyes with Sven. Thanks. Ragnar turned to Kest. And you. Good work. He slapped them both on their backs. Now we've got an elk to field dress. Together, they approached the fallen creature, each taking a moment to pay respects to creation and to the animal that would sustain their tribe. Then, with experienced hands, they set to work, the air filling with the sounds of cutting and tearing, the smell of fresh blood mixing with the earthy scent of the forest. As Ragnar looked at Sven, carefully removing the pelt, a strange warmth spread within him. He felt like he was part of a clan, part of something bigger than his own ambitions or his father's expectations. Perhaps this was what the long night was all about. Chapter 7. As the long night drew close, Ragnar, Kest and Sven had caught no more game. Ragnar pushed through the trees, squinting at the setting sun. "We should set up camp for the night." Kest tapped him on the shoulder. "Where's Sven?" Ragnar stopped and looked around. We should backtrack," Ragnar sighed. "Fine." He led the way back through the forest, his eyes fixed on the ground. After a few hundred paces, he gestured to a split in the tracks. "Looks like he went off. Maybe he's gone for a dump. Let's hope so." Kest smirked. "You hope he's having a dump?" "No, I hope he's not hurt." Ragnar rubbed his chin. "Maybe he saw something and wants the glory for himself." "Nah. I say he's just gone for a massive dump." "I don't know. Something feels off." As he moved further along Sven's trail, a whispering sound caught his ear. He held up a hand, signalling for silence. As he rounded a copse of firs, he caught sight of two figures shrouded in the dim light, conversing in hushed tones. Hidden by the shadows, Ragnar strained to hear their conversation. Sven's voice drifted through the trees. Another voice came in an unfamiliar accent. "Are you certain?" "Ragnar the Elder, trust me again, they won't suspect a thing. And they will be drunk. It's the solstice." "And what of the boy, the younger Ragnar?" Sven paused. "He's a concern, but not an immediate threat. I doubt he'll figure anything out." The stranger nodded. "Very well, we'll carry out the attack as planned." As the stranger moved to leave, Sven spoke up. "And my family? You promised their safety. They'll be unharmed." The stranger disappeared into the darkness. Ragnar's mind raced. Betrayal, attack. His family, his people, were in danger. He had to act. Chapter 8. Snow crunched under their boots as Ragnar and Kest sprinted through the forest, their breaths misting in the freezing air. Trees loomed around them, their shadows stretching across the snow-laden ground, the moonlight offering scant visibility. "We'll cut through Hollow Gorge," Ragnar shouted over the howl of the wind, directing Kest to a narrow pathway between towering cliffs. "Hollow Gorge? Are you mad? Would you rather Miran be overrun?" "Fair point." The cliffs seemed to close in around them, sheer rock walls blocking out the last hints of moonlight. Gusts of wind funneled through the narrow space, biting through their clothes, and causing the snow to swirl in disorienting patterns. "The wind plays tricks in the gorge, stay close." Ragnar squinted against the stinging flakes. He needed to get back to Mirand. His father had to be warned about the impending attack and Sven's betrayal. Loose rocks slipped under Ragnar's feet. More than once he stumbled, his boots skidding on the icy surface. A mournful cry echoed through the gorge, bouncing off the walls and causing both Ragnar and Kest to halt in their tracks. "Sounds like a wolf," Kest said. "Not just any wolf, Leggy," Ragnar said. "The direwolves of Hollow Gorge are said to be spirits of the damned, guarding the way to prevent souls from escaping." "Who told you that?" "Maya?" Ragnar frowned. "It's true. Ulfred told me." "Nah, you shouldn't listen to that crap about spirits and curses. They're just stories to scare the younger ones from wandering too far from Mirand. Still, it's a wolf, and where there's one, there's usually a pack. Ah, crap. We just need to focus." Ragnar pushed onward. "We don't have time for campfire stories." Kest sniffed. "You're the one who started going on about cursed direwolves." A dark shape materialized from the night, a pair of luminous golden eyes fixed on them. "Direwolf!" Kest's voice quivered as he fumbled for his bow. "We can't outrun it." Ragnar spoke in a low, steely tone as he drew his sword and dagger, his eyes never leaving the wolf. "We fight." With a howl, the wolf lunged at them, its jaws wide open. Ragnar met the beast head-on, his sword clashing against the creature's gnashing teeth. Kest knocked an arrow and pulled back. He hesitated. "I can't get a clear shot." Seizing the momentary imbalance of the wolf, Ragnar shoved the beast backward. The wolf yelped, staggered, and its paw seemed to give way under the unexpected force, the creature sliding back on the icy ground. Ragnar's muscles burned from the strain. Now Kest! Kest released the bowstring. The arrow soared, spinning through the air. The wolf twisted, and the arrow lodged itself into the snow, its shaft vibrating from the impact. With a fierce growl, the wolf limped into the swirling snowstorm. Ragnar's shoulders sagged in a mixture of relief and disappointment. There was honor in killing a wolf in the wild, and the wolf was still out there, wounded but alive. Without wasting another moment, Ragnar sheathed his weapons, his eyes meeting Kest's. Go. Now. Before it gathers the pack. Kest nodded, gathering his bow and unused arrows. Ragnar took off, his breath short and rapid. Kest glanced back. You think that thing will follow us? Hope not. Let's pray it goes after Raven knows. I knew he couldn't be trusted. You think your father will believe us? Ragnar squeezed the chalice around his neck. With creation's blessing, he'll have to. There's too much at stake. As the pair emerged from the gorge, the torches of Mirand came into view. Chapter 9. Mirand Castle loomed ahead. Wood smoke and the distant hum of celebration tinged the air. Ragnar's lungs ached with each breath, his body rebelling against the pace he and Kest had maintained. As he ran across the training yard, his gut churned with a tension he couldn't shake. The mead hall's imposing structure came into view, the atmosphere inside spilling out in waves of laughter and music. Ragnar burst through the hall's grand doors, Kest right behind him. The sensory overload hit him after the quiet of the forest, the rich smell of roasted meat, the clinking of mead cups, and the blur of faces turning towards him in a mixture of surprise and irritation. Ragnar found his father in the middle of a toast, the elder's goblet raised high, his cheeks glowing in the flickering torchlight. At his side, Olaf caught Ragnar's eye. Father! Ragnar's voice sliced through the clamour. His father's eyes narrowed. What is the meaning of this? He lowered his goblet, murmurs spreading through the hall. This is the long night, boy. Where's the game? Where's Sven? Ragnar's chest tightened, and he found himself unable to speak. For a heartbeat, he felt like that young boy again, standing before his father, awaiting either approval or reprimand, but he shook it off. Father, listen, he stepped forward. We've been betrayed. Sven's been conspiring with a rival clan. They plan to attack at dawn. The room fell into a hushed silence. Olaf stared hard at Ragnar. Is this a lie? A cover-up for a failed hunt? Before Ragnar could answer, Kest spoke up. It's no lie. We've been betrayed, honest word. Ragnar nodded. In the eyes of creation, I swear it. Ragnar the Elder nodded at his son. I believe you. The atmosphere in the hall shifted. Ragnar's father banged his fist on a shield, calling for attention, and took the hammer of Wolfsbane down from the wall. Warriors of Mirand, prepare for battle. We've been betrayed, but we are not defeated. We will meet them as we meet all challenges, head-on, and with our weapons in hand. As the hall erupted into organised chaos, Ragnar felt his father's heavy hand on his shoulder. You've done well to bring this news, my son. As the warriors of Mirand donned their armour and sharpened their blades, Ragnar and Kest stood among them, no longer boys but young warriors in their own right. Chapter 10. Ragnar strode into the training yard with Kest at his side. Torches flickered along the yard's perimeter, casting long shadows that danced and weaved across the icy ground. Olaf stood in the centre of it all, his powerful voice cutting through the clatter of weapons and the murmurs of warriors preparing for combat. Shields! We need more shields here. He pointed towards a stack of wooden bulwarks leaning against the far wall. Ragnar moved towards the stack and picked up a long shield. He gripped the handle, feeling its solid weight. He banged his sword against it, sending a clanging reverberation through the yard. Beside him, Kest cinched the straps of a leather cuirass over his padded tunic, his face unusually solemn. He gave one final tug, ensuring the cuirass was secure, before reaching for his shield. Never thought we'd actually have to use these for real, eh? I always knew we would. It was just a matter of when. Kest looked up, locking eyes with Ragnar. If, make sure I'm holding my sword. Ragnar clapped a hand on his shoulder and squeezed. Of course. And same for me. Kest nodded. Yeah, but it won't come to that. We're warriors. Ragnar thumped his chest. Proud and true. Proud and true. Ragnar looked around at his fellow warriors. Young men, some barely past the cusp of boyhood, were hurriedly strapping on arm guards, while others fumbled with their swords. Olaf crossed the yard to advise a group who were struggling to form a cohesive shield wall, his critique blunt but necessary. The sky began to lighten, the approaching dawn an ever-constant reminder of the battle that loomed. As the first rays of sunlight crept into the yard, the atmosphere grew tense. Ragnar gripped his shield and sword, feeling their comforting weight. Across the yard, Ragnar the Elder was in deep conversation with his war council. "You know, most people would be scared right now," Kest said. Ragnar shrugged. "Who says I'm not? But fear won't win the battle." "Well said," Olaf cut in. "You two ready?" "As we'll ever be," Kest said. Olaf looked them over, his eyes pausing on each piece of their armour and weapons. "You've grown much since I first trained you. Today, you'll prove to everyone, especially yourselves, just how much." With a deep breath, Ragnar turned to face the battlements. Villagers, including women and children, were reinforcing the walls, carrying supplies, and tending to makeshift medical stations. "Lads," Olaf said, "take these." He handed them each a small pouch. "Herbs, for energy and focus. Use them wisely." Ragnar nodded, tucking the pouch into his belt. Then he turned to Kest, clasping his friend's arm in a warrior's grip. "See you on the other side?" Kest grinned. "Oh, you can count on it. Here they come." Ragnar tightened his grip. Kest nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Let's give them a proper greeting." The rival clan burst from the tree line, a dark swarm against the white snow. They bellowed and roared, beating their shields as they charged. Chapter 11. Ragnar's shield locked with the men either side of him, creating a wall of wood and iron. The earth beneath his boots churned in a mixture of mud and snow. As the enemy charged, Ragnar bit down on the herb Olaf had given him, his senses sharpening, drowning out the screams and the noise of battle into a distant roar. An enemy warrior with a snarling face lunged forward, his sword aimed for Ragnar's throat. Ragnar raised his shield, deflecting the blade with a crash that sent shockwaves up his arm. His sword said in a deadly swoop, meeting flesh. The enemy warrior let out a strangled cry and staggered back, clutching his side where dark red blossomed before a pair of arrows struck his face and neck, sending him to the dirt. Another man advanced, axe raised high. More arrows came. Ragnar's sword met another, steel clashing against steel, sparks flying. A shove came from behind, almost sending him off balance as the shield wall heaved and buckled. Even as men screamed and fell around him, Ragnar found himself moving not out of thought but pure instinct. Parry, thrust, shield up, sidestep. Every maneuver was an automatic response, honed to precision over years of training. Each fallen warrior was immediately replaced by another, as if the very earth was birthing them to continue the onslaught. His arms screamed in protest, his shield feeling as though it weighed as much as a boulder. A mace swung towards him, and he barely managed to raise his shield in time. The impact jolted him backwards, rattling his skull, making him grit his teeth so hard he thought they might shatter. Through the narrow slit of his helm he caught a glimpse of Kest, a mere few yards away, yet unreachable through the crush of bodies. An arrow flew by and another enemy warrior fell. With a guttural roar, the men to his right surged forward, a concerted push that momentarily broke the enemy's momentum. Seizing the opportunity, Ragnar swung, his sword finding its mark. The enemy before him gasped, his eyes widening as arrows drove into his neck. For a moment, the chaos ebbed. Ragnar's lungs screamed for air, each breath a ragged gulp that tasted of metal and dust. A horn blew, heralding another wave of attackers. Ragnar tightened his grip on his sword and readied his shield, his body tensing. Shouts and screams, metal on metal, the thud of bodies hitting snow. The shield wall broke and Ragnar fought his way towards a tall figure in the midst of the melee. Here was Betrayal, the knife that cut deeper than any sword, and as he met Sven's eyes again, Ragnar's anger flared. "So it comes to this," Sven said, circling Ragnar. "Did you ever think we'd be standing on opposite sides?" Ragnar tossed his shield to the ground and drew his dagger, switching his sword to his offhand. "You chose your side when you betrayed us." Sven's lip curled, Life isn't as simple as you think. Loyalties shift. Alliances change. But honor doesn't. Sven lunged, his blade aimed for Ragnar's chest. Ragnar sidestepped and parried, the ringing clash of their swords reverberating in his ears. Sven pivoted, launching a flurry of attacks. Ragnar deflected each one, his blades dancing in intricate patterns. You've improved. Sven stepped back to catch his breath. For someone who fights like a shisha woman. Then you'll lose to a woman, Sven laughed. You always were cocky. I used to admire that about you. Ragnar's eyes narrowed. What happened to you, Sven? My father saw you as something special. I only ever saw a coward and a bully. Sven's expression darkened. Coward? You have no idea what that word means. While you were the golden boy, the future chief, I was the one who had to fight for every scrap of respect. That doesn't justify cowardice. That doesn't justify betrayal. Maybe not. Sven shrugged. But it makes it easier. With a roar, Sven struck again, more ferocious this time. Ragnar found himself on the defensive, parrying and dodging as Sven's blade whistled close. Ragnar saw his opening. It was a subtle thing, a slight imbalance in Sven's stance, an overreaching strike aimed to kill but leaving him vulnerable. Ragnar parried with his sword, his dagger slicing through the cold air, driving into flesh. Sven stumbled back, clutching his side. You're better than I remember. Ragnar met his gaze. You betrayed us, Sven. I didn't want it to come to this. Sven coughed, blood staining his lips as he dropped to one knee. And yet, here we are. Ragnar stood there for a long moment, staring down at the man he had once considered a brother. One of the older warriors kicked the sword from Sven's quivering hands and slammed his axe down, splitting Sven's skull down the middle. Sven died without his weapon, a traitor's death. And then the roars redoubled, the clash of weapons resounding anew. Kest was at Ragnar's side again. He's dead. He's really dead. Ragnar looked down at Sven's broken form. I just wish it could have been mine. It was. Brant just finished it before you had chance. Together they turned back to the fray, their weapons raised. The attackers faltered, their charge losing its momentum as the Wolfsbane clan pressed their advantage. As the sun rose higher, casting its pale winter light over the bloodied snow, the tide turned in favour of Mirand. When the rival clan broke, fleeing back into the forest, a great cheer rose. Chapter 12. Ragnar sheathed his dual blades, their once shining surfaces now dulled with the grit and grime of battle. He looked around, searching for familiar faces among the throng. Olaf was organising a group of men to secure the area and tend to the wounded. Ragnar's gaze fell upon his father, who stood with arms crossed, surveying the aftermath. The villagers began to gather their fallen, laying them out with care and reverence. Olaf approached Ragnar and Kest. I saw you in the battle. You fought well, warriors, both of you. Ragnar dipped his head. Thank you, uncle. But you failed to complete the long night. Ragnar blinked at him. We had to warn the clan. And you did. But the point of the long night is to hunt and to make a successful kill. He opened his grimy hands and frowned. I'm sorry, Ragnar, but you failed to do that. We did make a kill. We took down an elk. Olaf rubbed his beard. And where is this mysterious elk? Ragnar exchanged a glance with Kest. It's probably where we left it. Really? Kest nodded. Honest word. We were in the process of dressing it until we were interrupted by, well, you know, the impending doom of the village and all that. Olaf snorted. Fine. Assemble some men. Let's go fetch this elk of yours and bring it back to Mirand. Chapter 13. A small group of warriors, led by Ragnar, Kest and Olaf, ventured into the forest, dragging a cart behind them. After nearly an hour of walking, Ragnar gestured for the group to stop. It's here. He pointed towards their camp, the elk's form shrouded with freshly fallen snow. You did well. Olaf looked at Ragnar and then at Kest. Very well. Kest grinned, elbowing Ragnar. See, told you Olaf would be eating his words, along with some fine elk stew. Back at Mirand, the elk was received with much fanfare. It was not just a prize but a symbol. The young warriors had proven themselves, and the village had endured yet another trial. As the animal was hoisted off the cart, Ragnar the Elder clapped his son on the back. "You have both proven your mettle, both in the long night and on the field. I'm proud of you, son." "Thank you, father." Chapter 14. The mead hall's timbers echoed with laughter, shouts, and the clinking of goblets. Victory in battle and a successful long night had buoyed the spirits of the village. Ragnar the Elder stood, and the hall quieted. "We pay a heavy price for our survival." He raised his cup. "But let tonight also be a testament to the strength of Mirand, to the courage of its warriors, and to the unbreakable spirit of its people." A cheer erupted from the crowd, and stomping feet shook the walls. Ragnar the Elder raised his hand, beckoning Ragnar and Kest to come forward. "My son, Ragnar Wolfsbane, and his brother warrior Kest Joransson have shown exceptional skill and bravery." His eyes locked onto each of them in turn. "Not only did they complete the long night, but they warned us of the impending raid and fought valiantly to protect Mirand." He paused. "As of this moment, they will no longer train with the boys. They've earned the honor of training with the young men." Cheers echoed through the hall once more. Olaf gave them a curt nod. Kest gave Ragnar a light nudge. "You ready for this?" Ragnar looked at his father, then at his fellow warriors, and finally back at Kest. "More than ready." The end. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future stories. You can find out more about John Cronshaw and his work at johncronshaw.com. The Long Night is copyright 2023 by John Cronshaw. All rights reserved. This is